May 23, 1943. North Atlantic, approximately 400 miles southwest of Iceland. Kapitänleutnant Klaus Hartmann stood in the control room of U-954, watching depth gauges as his boat dove past 200 feet. The hydrophone operator's face had gone pale. Above them, the distinctive pings of Allied sonar swept through the water like mechanical fingers searching for prey. This was not how it was supposed to be. 3 years earlier, U-boat commanders had called the North Atlantic their hunting ground. They had stalked convoys with impunity, surfacing at night to fire torpedoes into merchant ships silhouetted against the moon. The British had depth charges, yes, but those crude weapons detonated at preset depths, creating sound and fury that obscured sonar tracking. A skilled commander could dive deep, change course during the blind period, and slip away while the escorts groped uselessly through disturbed water. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Hartmann had survived 17 patrols using these tactics. He had sunk 11 ships. He wore the Iron Cross First Class and the U-boat war badge with diamonds. At 32 years old, he represented the next generation of U-boat leadership, trained by the veterans who had pioneered wolfpack tactics. He knew every trick, every evasion maneuver, every way to exploit the technological limitations of Allied anti-submarine weapons. But something had changed in recent weeks. U-boats were disappearing at an alarming rate, not driven away or damaged, but destroyed completely with all hands lost. The attacks came without warning, no telltale depth charge detonations, no cascading explosions that announced the attacker's position. Just silence, then sudden catastrophic impact against the pressure hull. Then, death. The sonar pings grew louder. Hartmann ordered his boat to 300 feet and changed course to starboard. Standard evasion. The pings followed. His hydrophone operator reported propeller sounds directly overhead, an escort destroyer maintaining perfect contact despite the depth and course change. Then the operator heard something else, a series of splashes in the water ahead of the boat, not depth charges rolling off the stern. These were different. Multiple objects entering the water in a pattern. Hartmann had 3 seconds to wonder what weapon could be fired ahead of a pursuing ship before the first Hedgehog mortar struck U-954's forward pressure hull. The 35-pound Torpex warhead detonated on contact. A second projectile hit near the conning tower. A third penetrated the engine room. The pressure hull ruptured in 3 places simultaneously. At 300 feet depth, seawater entered at pressures exceeding 130 pounds per square inch. The Atlantic Ocean consumed 154 inches less than 40 seconds. 47 men died. None survived to describe what had killed them. 500 miles northeast, Admiral Donitz sat in his operations room at U-boat headquarters in Berlin, staring at a map covered with markers representing his submarine fleet. Each marker that disappeared represented not just machinery, but trained men, skilled commanders, and months of construction. In March, his wolfpacks had achieved their greatest success, sinking 82 Allied ships in the Atlantic. The statistics suggested Germany was winning the tonnage war, sink ships faster than the Allies could build them, and Britain would starve. But May had become a nightmare. In 3 weeks, 38 U-boats had been destroyed. 38. More losses than in the entire year of 1941. The mathematics were brutally simple. German shipyards produced 20 U-boats per month. Losses in May alone had consumed nearly 2 months of production. If this continued, the U-boat arm would cease to exist as an effective fighting force. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The reports from surviving commanders painted a disturbing picture. Allied escorts were no longer simply defending convoys. They were hunting U-boats with unprecedented effectiveness. New weapons appeared that could attack while maintaining sonar contact. Electronic detection equipment located surfaced U-boats at night from distances that made escape impossible. Long-range aircraft patrolled areas that had previously been beyond Allied air cover. The mid-Atlantic gap, where U-boats operated freely outside the range of land-based planes, had closed. Most troubling were accounts of a forward-throwing weapon that survivors called the Hedgehog. Unlike depth charges, which detonated whether they hit anything or not, these projectiles only exploded on contact with a submarine's hull. Escorts could fire them while still tracking their target on sonar. Misses were silent, preserving the acoustic conditions that made tracking possible. Hits were lethal. No U-boat commander had reported surviving a Hedgehog strike. None ever would. The weapon's existence suggested something deeper than simple technological improvement. It represented a fundamental shift in how the Allies approached anti-submarine warfare. For 3 years, U-boat tactics had exploited the limitations of depth charges, the blind spot when escorts passed over a submerged submarine, the acoustic disruption that prevented tracking after attack, the need to estimate target depth. These limitations had created windows of opportunity for evasion. The Hedgehog eliminated those windows. It fired ahead of the attacking ship, striking while the submarine was still within sonar range. It required no depth setting because it detonated on contact. It created no sound unless it hit something. Every advantage that had kept U-boat losses manageable through 1942 had vanished. The transformation began 3 years earlier in Britain, driven by desperate necessity rather than careful planning. September 1940. London was burning under nightly Luftwaffe raids. France had fallen. The British Army had evacuated Dunkirk, leaving behind virtually all its heavy equipment. The Royal Navy faced German U-boats strangling maritime supply lines. Britain needed food, fuel, weapons, and raw materials from North America. U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than convoys could cross the Atlantic safely. At the Admiralty's Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker examined the fundamental problem of depth charge attacks. Attacking ships had to pass directly over their targets, creating a period when sonar contact was lost. The speed of sound in water made echo ranging impossible at close distances. The outgoing sonar ping and returning echo merged into an instantaneous signal that human operators could not distinguish. This acoustic blind spot existed at the exact moment when escorts needed tracking information most desperately. Submarines exploited this ruthlessly. Skilled commanders timed evasion maneuvers for the blind period. A sharp turn at full speed could take a submarine hundreds of yards from its predicted position in the 60 to 90 seconds between loss of sonar contact and depth charge detonation. By the time the charges exploded, the target had vanished. Escorts dropped patterns of 10 or more depth charges, hoping statistical saturation would compensate for targeting uncertainty. It rarely worked. U-427 survived 678 depth charges dropped against it in April 1945. The submarine's pressure hull endured hours of explosions that would have destroyed any surface vessel. The cumulative shock might cause equipment failures or hull leaks that forced the boat to surface eventually, but immediate kills were rare. Statistical analysis showed that British escorts needed an average of 60 depth charge attacks to sink one U-boat. The ratio was unsustainable. Blacker proposed a weapon that could fire projectiles ahead of an attacking ship, landing them in the water while the submarine remained within sonar range. The concept was not new. Earlier experiments with forward-throwing mortars had failed due to technical problems with fusing and accuracy. But the strategic situation demanded solutions. Britain was losing the tonnage war. Something had to change. The weapon Blacker designed drew on his previous work with spigot mortars for infantry anti-tank weapons. Rather than firing projectiles from tubes, spigot mortars used a fixed rod that fit inside a hollow tail on the projectile itself. The propelling charge was contained in the tail. When fired, the explosion drove the projectile off the spigot, providing propulsion without requiring a heavy gun barrel. This allowed a single launcher to fire projectiles of varying sizes and weights. The design consisted of 24 spigots arranged in rows across a launcher frame. Each spigot held one projectile weighing 65 pounds with a 35-pound Torpex warhead. Torpex was a mixture of 42% RDX, 40% TNT, and 18% powdered aluminum. It was 50% more powerful than TNT alone. The projectiles were angled so they would land in a circular pattern roughly 130 feet in diameter, about 590 feet ahead of a stationary ship. The critical innovation was the contact fuse. Previous attempts at ahead-throwing weapons had used depth or time fuses that detonated whether they hit anything or not. This created the same acoustic disruption problem as depth charges. Blacker's projectiles only exploded when they struck something solid like a submarine's pressure hull. Misses sank silently to the ocean floor. The sonar picture remained undisturbed. Escorts could track their targets continuously through multiple attacks. Testing began aboard HMS Westcott in 1941. The prototype launcher resembled a metal hedge with projecting spigots, leading someone to suggest the name Hedgehog. The name stuck. Initial trials demonstrated the weapon's potential, but also revealed significant technical challenges. The contact fuses had to withstand the shock of entering water at high velocity, yet remain sensitive enough to detonate against relatively soft metal. The fuse mechanism had to distinguish between hitting water and hitting a submarine's hull. This required precision engineering under wartime production constraints. Production began in late 1942. By early 1943, approximately 100 British escorts had been equipped with Hedgehog launchers. The weapon entered combat in November 1942 when it achieved its first confirmed U-boat kill. But the initial success rate was disappointing. Only about 5% of attacks resulted in confirmed kills, barely better than depth charges. The problem was not the weapon itself, but how crews used it. Hedgehog required different tactics than depth charges. Escorts had to maintain steady sonar tracking while maneuvering into attack position. The weapon's 300-yard range meant ships needed precise information about target depth, course, and speed. Combat information centers had to coordinate sonar operators, navigation, and weapons crews with split-second timing. Many escort commanders were skeptical of the new weapon and preferred familiar depth charge tactics. The Royal Navy recognized that technical capability alone would not change outcomes. Crews needed training in Hedgehog employment. In early 1943, the Admiralty sent weapons development specialists to the escort base at Londonderry in Northern Ireland. They conducted intensive training sessions, demonstrating successful attacks, explaining the tactical advantages, and building confidence in the weapon system. The results were dramatic. By May 1943, Hedgehog kill rates had climbed to approximately 20%. One attack in 5 resulted in a confirmed U-boat destruction. This compared to 1 kill per 80 depth charge attacks. The improvement was not due to weapon modifications, but to better crew training and tactical employment. Escorts that mastered Hedgehog tactics became extraordinarily lethal anti-submarine platforms. The transformation happened at exactly the moment when multiple technological and tactical improvements converged to give the Allies decisive advantages in the Battle of the Atlantic. Longer-range aircraft closed the mid-Atlantic gap. Escort carriers provided air cover to convoys throughout their crossing. Improved radar detected surfaced U-boats at night from sufficient distances to allow interception before the submarines could dive. High-frequency direction finding equipment located U-boats when they transmitted radio messages. Code-breaking operations provided intelligence about U-boat patrol patterns and wolfpack tactics, but the Hedgehog represented something qualitatively different from these other improvements. Radar, aircraft, and intelligence helped escorts find U-boats. The Hedgehog killed them. It transformed every successful detection into a probable kill. U-boat commanders who had survived dozens of depth charge attacks discovered that Hedgehog attacks were generally fatal. There were no known survivors of direct Hedgehog hits. The weapon punched holes directly through pressure hulls, allowing catastrophic flooding that sank submarines in seconds. The psychological impact on the U-boat arm was profound. For 3 years, submariners had operated with reasonable confidence that skill and training could overcome Allied anti-submarine efforts. Depth charges were dangerous but survivable. Evasion tactics worked. Experienced commanders knew how to exploit acoustic blind spots and hydrophone limitations. The odds were manageable. Patrol duty was dangerous, but not suicidal. By May 1943, that calculation had changed fundamentally. U-boat losses exceeded replacements. New boats were being sunk on their first patrols before crews gained combat experience. Veteran commanders who had survived a dozen missions were dying in their first encounters with Hedgehog-equipped escorts. The sense of invulnerability that had characterized the U-boat arm in 1940 and 1941 had evaporated completely. The statistics told a story of systematic destruction. In March 1943, U-boats had sunk 82 Allied merchant ships in the Atlantic, while losing 12 submarines. The exchange rate favored Germany, but in April, losses climbed to 15 U-boats, while merchant ship sinkings dropped to 39. The trend continued into May. By mid-month, it was clear that something catastrophic was happening to the U-boat fleet. The losses came in several categories. 18 U-boats were destroyed in direct convoy battles, primarily by Hedgehog-equipped escorts. 14 were sunk by air patrols using improved radar and depth charges. 6 were destroyed in the Bay of Biscay as they transited to and from French bases. 4 were lost to accidents and other causes. The total for May 1943 reached 43 U-boats destroyed. This represented 25% of the operational U-boat fleet. Equally significant was the loss of experienced crews. U-boat training emphasized the transfer of knowledge from veterans to newcomers. Experienced commanders taught evasion tactics, attack techniques, and survival procedures. Junior officers learned by serving under veteran skippers. This system worked when losses were moderate, and veterans survived long enough to pass knowledge to the next generation. But Black May killed hundreds of experienced submariners, creating a knowledge vacuum that could not be filled quickly. Among the dead was Peter Donitz, 21-year-old son of Admiral Karl Donitz. He served as watch officer aboard U-954. The submarine was lost with all hands on May 24 during an attack on convoy SC-130. The convoy escaped without losses while 5 U-boats were destroyed. Peter Donitz's death symbolized the generational catastrophe unfolding throughout the U-boat arm. The men who would have become the next generation of commanders were dying before they could gain command experience. Admiral Donitz faced an impossible situation. His strategic goal required sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. But U-boats were being destroyed faster than German shipyards could build replacements. The mathematics were unforgiving. If losses continued at May's rate, the operational U-boat fleet would be eliminated within 6 months, regardless of how many new boats entered service. On May 24, 1943, Donitz ordered most U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic. The decision acknowledged a reality that German naval leadership had refused to accept for weeks. The Battle of the Atlantic had turned decisively against Germany. The wolf packs that had terrorized convoy routes for 3 years could no longer operate effectively. Allied technological advantages, particularly the Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, had made U-boat operations unsustainably costly. The withdrawal was temporary. Donitz hoped to introduce countermeasures that would restore U-boat effectiveness. New acoustic torpedoes that homed on propeller sounds, improved radar warning receivers, snorkel devices that allowed submarines to run diesel engines while submerged, enhanced anti-aircraft armament for surface combat. These innovations might restore the tactical balance, but the Hedgehog advantage could not be countered by German technology. It was not a detection system that could be jammed or evaded. It was a weapon that killed submarines more efficiently than anything previously deployed. Unless German designers could develop pressure hulls that resisted contact explosions, or unless U-boat tactics could prevent escorts from achieving attack positions, the Hedgehog would continue extracting unsustainable losses. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The U-boats that remained on patrol after May 24 operated under conditions radically different from anything their commanders had experienced. Gone was the aggressive confidence of wolfpack tactics. Gone was the calculated risk-taking that had characterized successful patrols in 1941 and 1942. What remained was a desperate struggle for survival against escorts equipped with weapons that killed with terrifying efficiency. Convoy SC-130 exemplified the transformation. The convoy consisted of merchant ships crossing from North America to Britain, following routes that U-boat intelligence had predicted accurately. 30 U-boats positioned themselves to intercept what should have been a vulnerable target. The escorts included British and Canadian warships, equipped with the latest detection equipment and Hedgehog launchers. The battle that followed was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was systematic destruction. U-boats attempting to approach the convoy found themselves detected, tracked, and attacked with precision that made evasion nearly impossible. Hedgehog projectiles rained down on submarines that tried to dive away from escorts. The silent weapons gave no warning of attack. One moment a U-boat was maneuvering to escape. The next moment, contact-fused warheads were punching through its pressure hull. 5 U-boats were destroyed attacking SC-130. Not one merchant ship was sunk. The exchange rate had inverted completely. Where U-boats had once inflicted losses far exceeding their own casualties, they now died without achieving their mission objectives. The escorts had become the hunters. The submarines had become the prey. The technological advantage was overwhelming, but technology alone did not account for Allied success. Escort crews had developed tactical proficiency through intensive training and combat experience. They understood how U-boats maneuvered. They knew when submarine commanders would attempt to go deep or change course. They coordinated sonar tracking with attack positioning so precisely that Hedgehog patterns landed exactly where submarines tried to evade. British escort groups, particularly those led by experienced commanders like Captain Frederick Walker, developed systematic methods for prosecuting contacts. When sonar detected a submarine, escorts immediately formed a tracking pattern that prevented escape. While one ship maintained continuous sonar contact, others maneuvered into attack positions. Hedgehog attacks came in carefully timed sequences. If the first attack missed, escorts adjusted aim based on the submarine's reaction and launched again, and again, until the target was destroyed or definitively lost. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Walker's 2nd Escort Group achieved remarkable success using these tactics. Between November 1943 and February 1944, Walker's ships sank 6 U-boats in 3 weeks. The patrol from January 31st to February 19, 1944, destroyed U-592, U-762, U-238, U-734, U-424, and U-264. All 6 kills involved either Hedgehog attacks or coordinated depth charge patterns guided by the same tactical principles that made Hedgehog effective. Continuous tracking, precise attack positioning, methodical prosecution of contacts until the target was confirmed destroyed. Walker himself did not live to see the final Allied victory in the Atlantic. He died in July 1944 from exhaustion and stress-related illness at age 48, but the tactical methods he pioneered became standard procedure throughout Allied escort forces. The combination of Hedgehog weapons and Walker's systematic prosecution tactics transformed anti-submarine warfare from statistical attrition to precision hunting. The United States Navy adopted Hedgehog with even greater enthusiasm than the Royal Navy. American destroyer escorts, specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare, incorporated Hedgehog launchers as standard equipment. These ships were smaller and less expensive than fleet destroyers, allowing rapid mass production. By mid-1943, American shipyards were launching destroyer escorts at a rate of 17 per month. The Buckley-class destroyer escorts displaced 1,400 tons, carried a crew of 186, and could sustain speeds of 23 knots. They mounted 3 3-inch guns for surface combat, depth charge racks, K-gun depth charge throwers, and the critical Hedgehog launcher on the foredeck. These ships were optimized for one mission: hunting and killing submarines. American destroyer escorts began operations in the Atlantic in early 1943. They escorted convoys across ocean routes where U-boats had previously operated with relative freedom. They formed hunter-killer groups centered on small escort carriers, roaming designated patrol areas to seek out and destroy U-boats proactively rather than waiting for submarines to attack convoys. The effectiveness of these hunter-killer groups was devastating. USS Bogue and her destroyer escort screen accounted for 13 U-boat kills between June 1943 and August 1944. USS Card and her escorts sank 9 U-boats. USS Guadalcanal's group, commanded by Captain Daniel Gallery, destroyed 5 U-boats and captured U-505 intact in June 1944, providing Allied intelligence with code books, radar equipment, and acoustic torpedo specifications. But the most extraordinary demonstration of Hedgehog effectiveness occurred not in the Atlantic but in the Pacific, where American destroyer escorts faced Japanese submarines employing similar tactics to their German counterparts. The story of USS England and her remarkable 12-day patrol in May 1944 revealed what a well-trained crew with Hedgehog weapons could achieve under combat conditions. May 18, 1944. Purvis Bay, Solomon Islands. USS England, a Buckley-class destroyer escort commissioned in December 1943, received orders, along with sister ships USS George and USS Raby, to intercept a Japanese submarine reported heading toward Buin to deliver supplies to isolated garrisons. The submarine was I-16, a large Japanese fleet boat displacing 2,000 tons when surfaced. England's executive officer was Lieutenant John Williamson, a veteran of Atlantic escort duty who had witnessed U-boat attacks on convoys during American neutrality patrols in 1941. Williamson brought to England a passionate commitment to anti-submarine proficiency. He drilled the crew relentlessly in sonar operation, Hedgehog firing procedures, and attack coordination. His standards were uncompromising. His ship would be ready when combat came. On the afternoon of May 19th, England's sonar operator detected a submarine contact. The destroyer escort moved into attack position and launched Hedgehogs 4 times. Each attack missed. I-16's commander skillfully evaded by following England's wake, exploiting the acoustic shadow created by the destroyer escort's propellers. On the 5th attack run, the tactical officer adjusted the firing solution to account for this tactic. The Hedgehog salvo landed precisely where the submarine was attempting to hide. 4 to 6 explosions erupted beneath England's bow. The crew cheered as they heard the unmistakable sound of a submarine's pressure hull collapsing under deep water pressure. Debris and oil surfaced. I-16 and her 85 crew members were gone. England had achieved her first kill. What happened next would become the most remarkable submarine hunting patrol in naval history. American codebreakers had intercepted Japanese naval communications, revealing that 7 submarines were being positioned in a picket line north of the Admiralty Islands. The submarines were RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-116, and 2 others. Their mission was to detect and report American carrier movements that might indicate a strike against Japanese bases in the Pacific. Rather than avoid the submarine line, American commanders decided to destroy it systematically. England and her 2 sister ships would hunt the submarines one by one, rolling up the entire picket line from end to end. On the night of May 22nd, USS George detected RO-106 on radar as the submarine cruised on the surface. The submarine dove when illuminated by searchlight. England regained sonar contact and moved into attack position. The first Hedgehog salvo missed. The second attack at 0501 hours scored at least 3 direct hits. A massive underwater explosion followed. Oil and debris confirmed the kill. England had sunk her second submarine in 4 days, May 23rd. The 3 destroyer escorts formed a search line sweeping north toward the next submarine's patrol area. At 0617 hours, USS Raby gained sonar contact on RO-104. For 2 hours, Raby and George made 8 separate Hedgehog attacks. All missed. The Japanese commander was skilled, maneuvering aggressively to evade the incoming projectiles. At 0834 hours, England was ordered to take over the attack. Lieutenant Williamson brought his ship into position with precision developed through months of training. The sonar picture was clear. The target's depth, course, and speed were known. England's Hedgehog crew had the firing solution calculated perfectly. The salvo landed in a tight pattern around the submarine's position. 3 explosions. The sound of metal tearing, the groan of a pressure hull failing under stress. RO-104 died instantly, taking 40 crew members with her. England had sunk 3 submarines in 5 days. The patrol continued. May 24th at 0150 hours, USS George detected RO-116 on radar. England made sonar contact at 0150 and achieved attack position by 0214. The first Hedgehog salvo scored 3 to 5 direct hits. Breaking up noises followed, though without the massive secondary explosions that had characterized earlier kills. By dawn, a large oil slick covered several square miles of ocean. RO-116's 56 crew members were dead. A hunter-killer group built around escort carrier USS Hogat Bay arrived on May 26, allowing the 3 exhausted destroyer escorts to head for Manus to refuel and rearm. On the way, at 2300 hours on May 26, England detected RO-108 on sonar. The submarine was running submerged, attempting to transit through the area without being detected. England launched Hedgehog on the first attack run. Direct hits. The explosions were muffled, coming from deep water, but the sonar picture confirmed total destruction. RO-108's crew of 58 died without knowing what had killed them. England had sunk 5 submarines in 8 days. No warship in history had achieved such a feat. After refueling at Manus, England and her sister ships, now joined by USS Spangler, returned to the patrol area. The final submarine in the Japanese picket line was RO-105. American forces knew its approximate location from radio intercepts. What followed was one of the most intense submarine hunts of the Pacific War. USS Hazelwood, a fleet destroyer, detected RO-Sank on radar at 0156 hours on May 31st. The submarine commander was exceptionally skilled. For 25 hours, RO-105 evaded over 20 separate Hedgehog attacks by various ships. The submarine stayed deep, changed course frequently, and exploited every acoustic shadow and thermal layer in the water. When forced to the surface by oxygen depletion, the submarine positioned itself directly between USS Raby and USS George, so neither could fire without risking hitting the other ship. At 0736 hours on May 31st, England was finally cleared to attack. Lieutenant Williamson had been observing RO-105's evasion tactics for hours. He understood how the Japanese commander was maneuvering. The firing solution accounted for every probable evasion. The Hedgehog salvo was perfect. 6 to 10 explosions. A major secondary explosion 5 minutes later as internal systems failed. Oil and debris. RO-105 and her 56 crew members joined the other submarines England had destroyed. In 12 days, 1 American destroyer escort had sunk 6 enemy submarines. The feat remains unmatched in naval history. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a message that would become famous. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. The promise was kept. When the destroyer escort was decommissioned after the war, the name England was immediately assigned to a new guided missile cruiser. But England's achievement was more than an individual accomplishment. It demonstrated what Hedgehog weapons could achieve when employed by a well-trained crew with excellent intelligence support. Every attack had followed the same pattern. Detection through radar or sonar, precise maneuvering into attack position, careful calculation of target depth and course. Hedgehog salvos fired to saturate the area where the submarine would be when the projectiles arrived. Contact detonations. Confirmed kills. The 6 submarines England destroyed represented nearly 10% of all Japanese submarine losses in May 1944. but the tactical significance extended beyond the immediate kills. Japan's submarine picket line had been designed to provide early warning of American carrier movements. Its destruction left Japanese commanders blind to the massive American naval force, preparing to invade the Mariana Islands. When American forces struck Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in June, Japanese commanders were caught unprepared because their submarine warning system had been systematically destroyed. The parallel to Germany's experience in the Atlantic was exact. Superior anti-submarine technology, particularly Hedgehog weapons, had transformed submarines from hunters into prey. Japanese submarines, like German U-boats, discovered that their tactical advantages had evaporated. Evasion techniques developed against conventional depth charges failed against Hedgehog attacks. The silent projectiles gave no warning. The contact fuses required no depth setting. The circular pattern coverage made precise evasion nearly impossible. By late 1944, the statistical evidence was overwhelming. British records showed that Hedgehog attacks achieved kills at a rate of approximately 1 in 5, compared to 1 in 80 for depth charge attacks. American records from the Pacific showed similar success rates. Of the last 16 U-boats sunk by United States Navy destroyer escorts in the Atlantic, 11 were destroyed by Hedgehog. The weapon had become the preferred anti-submarine tool for escorts throughout both oceans. The German response to Hedgehog was primarily tactical rather than technological. U-boats could not develop armor thick enough to resist contact explosions without becoming too heavy to function as submarines. Instead, German designers introduced acoustic torpedoes intended to sink escorts before they could close to Hedgehog range. The T-5 Zornkönig torpedo, introduced in September 1943, used passive acoustic homing to guide itself toward propeller sounds. Allied escorts countered with Fokker noisemakers, towed behind ships to decoy acoustic torpedoes away from their targets. The technological competition continued throughout 1944, with increasingly sophisticated weapons and countermeasures on both sides. But none of these innovations restored U-boat effectiveness to pre-May 1943 levels. The fundamental problem remained. Once an escort detected a submarine and closed to attack range, Hedgehog weapons provided nearly certain kills. The introduction of the Squid anti-submarine mortar in late 1943 gave the Royal Navy an even more capable weapon. Squid fired 3 large depth charges in a triangular pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike Hedgehog, Squid projectiles used proximity fuzzes that detonated at preset depths. But the weapon incorporated automatic targeting based on sonar data, allowing incredibly precise attacks. Ships equipped with Squid achieved kill rates approaching 30%. Together, Hedgehog and Squid transformed the Battle of the Atlantic from an uncertain struggle into systematic elimination of U-boat capabilities. By mid-1944, German submarines could barely operate in the North Atlantic. Coastal waters around Britain, which had been dangerous hunting grounds for U-boats in 1940, became killing zones where every patrol faced near-certain destruction. The statistical toll was catastrophic for Germany. Of approximately 1,100 U-boats produced during the war, nearly 800 were lost to Allied action. 28,000 of 40,000 U-boat crew members died. The casualty rate exceeded 70%, making U-boat service the deadliest assignment in the German military. More U-boat sailors died than served. The simple mathematics of those numbers revealed the impossibility of sustaining operations against Allied anti-submarine capabilities. Admiral Donitz attempted to restore U-boat effectiveness through technological innovation. The Type XXI submarine, introduced in early 1945, featured streamlined hulls, improved battery capacity, and snorkel systems that allowed extended submerged operations. These boats could potentially evade detection long enough to reach attack positions. But the war ended before sufficient numbers entered service to test whether design improvements could overcome Allied anti-submarine dominance. The answer was almost certainly no. Technology that improved detection evasion could not protect submarines once escorts achieved attack positions. Hedgehog and Squid weapons would kill Type XXI boats as efficiently as they killed earlier designs. Unless German submarines could operate without ever being detected, they would eventually encounter escorts armed with forward-throwing weapons, and those encounters would be fatal. The broader strategic impact of the Hedgehog and Allied anti-submarine warfare capabilities cannot be overstated. Germany's only realistic chance of winning World War II involved strangling Britain's supply lines before American industrial power could be brought to bear. If U-boats had maintained their early success rates through 1943 and 1944, Britain might have been forced to negotiate a separate peace, or at minimum would have been unable to support American and Canadian forces for the invasion of Europe. Instead, Allied convoys crossed the Atlantic in 1943 and 1944 with minimal losses. In November 1942, during Operation Torch, American invasion forces sailed 3,000 miles across the Atlantic, without significant interference from U-boats. In 1943 and 1944, 3 million American and Allied servicemen crossed to Britain in preparation for D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history depended absolutely on secure Atlantic supply lines. Those supply lines existed because escorts equipped with Hedgehog weapons had broken the U-boat threat. The transformation from March 1943, when U-boats nearly cut Britain's lifeline, to June 1944, when millions of tons of supplies and millions of troops crossed safely, represented one of the most dramatic military reversals in history. Technology, particularly the Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, made that reversal possible. The human cost of the U-boat war fell most heavily on merchant sailors, who crewed the cargo ships that U-boats targeted. Over 30,000 British merchant seamen died between 1939 and 1945. American, Norwegian, Dutch, Greek, and other Allied merchant sailors died by the thousands. These men sailed without weapons, without armor, in ships designed to carry cargo rather than survive combat. When torpedoes struck, they died by fire, drowning, or exposure in lifeboats. The Hedgehog offered them no direct protection. Merchant ships could not fight submarines, but by allowing escorts to kill U-boats more efficiently, the Hedgehog reduced the number of submarines on patrol and made convoy routes progressively safer. Merchant sailor casualties dropped dramatically after May 1943. The men who survived to sail in 1944 and 1945 owed their lives partly to a weapon most never saw, fired from escort ships most never served aboard. The U-boat sailors who died fighting against Hedgehog-equipped escorts deserve recognition as well. They were not monsters but men serving their country under conditions of almost unimaginable stress. Life aboard a U-boat was miserable under the best conditions: cramped quarters, limited food, constant dampness, the smell of diesel fuel and unwashed bodies, long periods of tedium interrupted by moments of terror when depth charges detonated nearby or aircraft attacked from above. By late 1943, U-boat sailors knew their chances of survival were minimal. They sailed anyway because they were ordered to, because they believed in their mission, or because desertion meant execution. They died in submarines that became steel coffins when Hedgehog projectiles punctured their hulls. The water that rushed in at crushing pressures killed them in seconds. Some submarines imploded so completely that no trace remained except oil slicks and debris fields. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.